You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin. Story 1. The Moving Cairn. Sarah and Mark were experienced hikers, always looking for new trails in remote mountains. This summer, they chose a path through an old, rarely visited part of the range, known for its deep valleys, sharp rocky peaks, and ancient silent woods. They loved the quiet, the feeling of being truly alone in nature, far from any other people or sounds of cars. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth, and the sun felt warm on their faces as they started their journey. The first day was tough but rewarding. They hiked for hours, climbing steep paths, crossing small streams, their boots crunching on fallen leaves and loose gravel. The sun filtered through the thick canopy of towering trees, making shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. They saw no one else, just the endless trees and the vast sky. As dusk began to settle, casting long, purple shadows across the landscape, they found a good spot to camp beside a small, rushing stream. They set up their tent quickly, cooked a simple meal over a small fire, and enjoyed the peaceful silence. Just before dark swallowed the last light, Mark pointed to something on a distant rocky ridge, high above them. "Look," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Someone built a cairn." It was a tall, thin stack of stones, carefully piled one on top of the other, marking a spot. It looked out of place, too perfect, too deliberate, against the wild, jagged mountainside. Sarah thought it was odd. Most cairns were for marking trails, but this one seemed to be marking nothing, just standing alone on the remote ridge. Maybe another hiker had left it, a lonely landmark. They went to sleep soon after, the sound of the stream, a peaceful backdrop, the crackle of their small fire slowly dying out. But that night, the peace shattered. Sarah woke up suddenly, her eyes snapping open in the total darkness of the tent. The rain had started, a soft, steady drumming on their tent fabric, a sound that usually lulled her to sleep. But beneath the rain, she heard a faint, distinct scraping sound outside. It was a low, grating noise, like heavy stones being dragged across rough rock. She thought it was just the wind, or perhaps a small landslide, or loose rocks falling down the mountain. She tried to tell herself that, but the sound seemed too rhythmic, too intentional. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. It was unnerving. She nudged Mark awake, whispering, "Did you hear that?" Mark, sleepy, mumbled something about imagination and rolled over. Sarah lay awake, listening. The scraping continued, faint but persistent. In the morning, the scraping sound was gone. They packed up, their movements slow, a feeling of unease hanging in the air. As they started hiking again, climbing out of the valley, Mark stopped dead. He pointed towards the ridge where they had seen the cairn the night before. His face was pale. "The cairn," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's closer." Sarah looked. He was right. The stack of stones was indeed closer to their camp than it had been the night before. It was still on the ridge, but definitely lower down the slope, much nearer to the valley floor. It seemed utterly impossible. How could a stack of stones move on its own? It was too heavy for any animal, and no person would do that in the middle of the night. They tried to ignore it. They hiked on, pushing the unsettling thought out of their minds, trying to rationalize it as a trick of the light or a mistake in their memory. But the feeling of being watched, of something shifting in the vast, silent landscape, grew stronger with every step they took. The air itself seemed heavier, colder. That evening they set up camp in a new, even deeper valley, surrounded by ancient, towering trees that seemed to lean in, watching. As darkness fell, the rain started again, a soft, insistent drumming. And there it was, on the ridge directly above them, much closer now, the tall, thin cairn. It seemed even taller than before, casting a long, thin shadow over their tent, like a giant, silent finger. And in the dim, fading light, Sarah thought she saw a faint glow coming from between its stones, a soft, sickly green light, pulsing faintly in the growing gloom. The scraping sound returned that night, louder now, more deliberate, more powerful. It was heavy, like giant stones being dragged across rough rock. Grind, scrape, thump. And sometimes it was followed by a low, guttural grunt, like something huge exerting immense effort. The ground beneath their tent seemed to vibrate with each sound. Sarah and Mark huddled together in their tent, too scared to move, too scared to even breathe loudly, listening to the impossible, horrifying sounds outside, knowing they were trapped in the dark. The green glow from the cairn pulsed through the fabric of their tent, a faint, unsettling heartbeat in the night. The next morning, the rain was still falling. They crawled out of their tent, their bodies stiff with fear, their faces pale. The cairn was right above their camp, just a few 100 feet away, looming over them. It was even taller now, reaching towards the sky, its base wider, its stones darker. The faint glow from between its stones was clearer, brighter, a sickening green light that seemed to pulse with a slow, living rhythm. Mark, driven by a desperate need to understand, a need stronger than his fear, decided they had to see it up close. He felt a strange pull towards it, a dark curiosity. Sarah, though terrified, followed him, unable to resist the pull either. They approached it slowly, carefully, their boots silent on the wet ground. The air around the cairn was intensely cold, thick with a strange, earthy smell, like wet soil mixed with something rotten. The scraping sound was constant now, a low, grinding growl, and the low grunts seemed to come from within the stack of stones itself, muffled and deep. As they reached the cairn, the green glow pulsed violently, casting eerie shadows that danced around them. They looked closer, and their blood ran cold, freezing in their veins. The stones weren't just stacked, they were slowly, almost invisibly, moving, shifting, grinding against each other with a wet, grating sound. And between the gaps, where the green light pulsed, they saw something else. Not just light, something dark and wet was squirming, pushing the stones from the inside, forcing them apart. Something immensely strong, too large for the space. It looked like thick, slimy tentacles, dark and glistening, writhing in the gaps. Then the cairn stopped moving. The scraping sounds stopped. The grunts ended. The grinding ceased. A profound, absolute silence fell over the valley, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing and the steady drumming of the rain on the leaves. The green glow pulsed once, twice, then steadied. And then, from the very top of the cairn, from the highest point of the stack of stones, a low, wet gurgle rose. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, from between the topmost stones, a single, black, unblinking eye opened. It was huge, wet, and filled with a cold, ancient intelligence. It was too big for a human face, too dark for any animal. It stared directly at them, unblinking, its gaze chilling them to the bone. Sarah and Mark didn't scream. They didn't move. They just turned as one, their bodies reacting faster than their minds, and ran. They ran without looking back, crashing blindly through the dense forest, stumbling over roots, falling, scrambling back up, their lungs burning, their legs aching, not caring about the trail. Just away from the moving cairn, away from the huge black eye, away from the horrifying truth of the mountains. They ran until they burst out of the trees onto a paved, distant road, their bodies shaking, their minds reeling. They never went back to those mountains. They sold all their hiking gear, gave away their tents and boots. They tried to forget what they saw, what they heard, what they felt. They moved to a big city where the constant noise and lights could hopefully drown out the memories. But sometimes, when the rain falls and the house is quiet and the darkness presses in, they hear it, a faint scraping sound, like stones being dragged from somewhere far away. And sometimes, when they close their eyes, they see it, a huge black eye, unblinking, watching them from the darkness, always watching, always growing. And they know with a bone-chilling certainty that the cairn isn't just a stack of stones. It's something else, something ancient and alive, and it's always moving, always watching, always growing. And one day they fear it will find them, no matter how far they run. Story 2. The Abandoned Cabin Supper. Sarah and David loved exploring abandoned places. Old buildings, forgotten structures, decaying ruins. They saw the beauty in decay, the hidden stories left behind by those who once lived there. For a long weekend, they decided to hike deep into a secluded, rarely visited forest to find an old, rumored hunting cabin, supposedly untouched for decades. It was a true adventure, a journey into the wild unknown. The hike was long and hard. The trail was almost gone, swallowed by overgrown bushes and fallen trees. They had to push through dense undergrowth, climb over moss-covered logs, and cross small, muddy streams. The forest was thick, silent, and ancient, the trees reaching high towards the sky, blocking out most of the sunlight. But after hours of pushing through the dense woods, just as their hope was fading, they found it, a small wooden cabin, leaning heavily to one side, its windows shattered like broken eyes, its front door hanging open like a gaping dark mouth. It looked exactly as they had imagined, completely forgotten, slowly being swallowed by nature itself. They pushed the door open further. It groaned on rusty hinges and stepped inside. The air was cold, damp, and smelled strongly of old, decaying wood and something else, something faintly sweet and earthy, like disturbed soil. Dust covered everything in thick layers, like a gray blanket. A single, rickety wooden table stood in the middle of the main room, almost collapsing. And in the exact center of that clean circle, resting perfectly flat, there was a single, perfectly clean porcelain plate. It was empty, not a speck of dust on it. Sarah frowned. That was strange. More than strange. Why would one plate be clean in a cabin, untouched for decades? It made no sense. She called out to David, her voice a nervous whisper, but he was already deep inside the house. His voice muffled as he called back, exploring the dark corners of the abandoned rooms. She shrugged, trying to tell herself it was just an old trick of the light, or maybe an animal had disturbed the dust. She continued taking pictures. Her phone flashed briefly, lighting up the dark room, but then from the next room, a loud, distinct clink rang out. It sounded like metal striking ceramic. This was immediately followed by a soft. David came back into the main room, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. It sounded like someone eating, really close. Sarah nodded, her heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I found this," she said, pointing with a shaking finger to the clean plate on the table. A sudden, cold dread washed over them. They knew this was wrong. The cabin felt different now. No longer peacefully abandoned, but actively, chillingly occupied. They decided, without a word, that they had to leave. They turned to go, their footsteps quiet on the dusty floorboards. But as they took their first steps towards the hanging door, they heard a loud thump from the kitchen, as if something heavy had just been placed on the counter. This was followed by a low, drawn-out, contented sigh, a sound of deep satisfaction. It sounded exactly like someone had just finished a large, very satisfying meal. They ran, scrambling out of the cabin, pushing through the hanging door, crashing blindly through the thick bushes and overgrown vines. They didn't dare to look back. They hiked through the growing darkness of the forest, fear pushing them forward, their lungs burning, their hearts hammering. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like footsteps behind them. They could feel unseen eyes on their backs. They ran for what felt like hours, the forest seeming to close in around them, its trees dark and silent, watching. They finally burst out of the dense woods onto the narrow, paved road where their car was parked, just as the rain started to fall, drumming hard on the car roof. They jumped into the car, locked the doors, and drove away quickly, leaving the silent, dark forest and the horrifying cabin behind them. They didn't stop until they were back in the safety of their own home, miles and miles away from the wilderness. They tried to forget the cabin. They told themselves it was just their minds playing tricks in the isolated woods, that the sounds were animals, the plate a bizarre coincidence. They tried to go back to their normal lives, but the memory of the clean plate and the chewing sounds haunted them, creeping into their thoughts at night. A week later, life had almost returned to normal. David was cooking dinner in their kitchen, the familiar smells comforting. Sarah was setting the table, pulling out their good porcelain plates from the cupboard. She grabbed one, and it felt strangely cold, much colder than the others, and had a faint, sweet, earthy smell clinging to it. A smell she remembered from the cabin. She frowned. It was one of her good porcelain plates, the same kind she had seen in the cabin. She had bought them recently. It shouldn't smell like that. She looked at the plate closely under the kitchen light. In the very center where food would normally sit, there was a faint, almost invisible ring, like a dark, slightly oily stain. And inside the ring, clear and unmistakable, was a single, perfectly formed footprint. It wasn't a human foot. It was small, round, and had only 3 distinct toes, pressed firmly into the porcelain. Sarah gasped, a choked sound escaping her. She dropped the plate, and it shattered on the floor with a loud crash. David rushed over, asking what was wrong. That night, the rain fell softly outside their house, a gentle, soothing sound. They sat in their living room, huddled together on the sofa, trying to calm down, trying to pretend everything was normal. Then they heard it. From their kitchen, a faint clink, like metal hitting ceramic. It was followed by a soft, rhythmic chewing sound, wet and deliberate. And then, a low, contented sigh. They looked at each other, wide-eyed with terror, their faces pale in the dim light. The chewing continued, getting louder, closer. They heard the sounds move into their hallway. Slurp, chew, clink. It was moving towards the living room, its unseen presence chilling them to the bone. The sound stopped directly outside the living room door. A profound, terrifying silence fell over the house. After a long, agonizing minute that felt like an eternity, David slowly, cautiously, peeked over the edge of the coffee table, his breath held tight. The living room was empty. The door was open. Everything seemed normal. The shadows were still. But on their perfectly clean coffee table, in the very center, was a single perfectly clean porcelain plate. It was empty, no food, but around it, A faint, sweet, earthy smell lingered, the smell of the abandoned cabin. And on the table where the plate had sat was a thin layer of fine dust. And in the dust, just like in the cabin, a clear circle, as if someone had recently wiped it clean. And inside that circle, a fresh, distinct, three-toed footprint pressed into the dust. Sarah and David still live in their house. They never go near abandoned places again. They never go hiking in remote forests. They always keep their kitchen clean, their plates put away in sealed boxes. But sometimes, when the rain falls and the house is completely quiet, they hear it. A faint clink from the kitchen, a soft, wet chewing sound, and a low, contented sigh. And they know, with a bone-chilling certainty, that the cabin wasn't abandoned. It was just waiting. And whatever ate there found its way out of the forest, and now it knows where they live, and it's always hungry, always watching, always waiting for its next supper. Story 3, The Whispering Lake. Maria loved the quiet of remote places. She often went camping alone, deep in forests where no one else went. This time, she found a small hidden lake, sparkling under the sun, surrounded by tall, silent pine trees. It was so still, so peaceful, she felt like she was the only person left in the world. She set up her tent near the water's edge, ready for a few days of pure calm. The first day passed like a dream. She hiked around the lake, listened to the birds, and felt completely at peace. As evening approached, she cooked a simple meal over her small campfire. The air grew cool, and the lake's surface became like a dark mirror, reflecting the first stars. But as the deep quiet of night settled, Maria heard a sound from the lake. It was a faint, almost musical whisper, seeming to rise from the very center of the water. It wasn't the wind, for the trees around her were still. It was too soft, too pure, too melodic, like many voices singing a sad, wordless tune. Maria frowned. It was beautiful, haunting, and utterly captivating, drawing her attention completely. She thought it was just the way sound carried over the water in such a silent place. She listened for a long time before falling asleep, the faint whispers a strange lullaby. The next morning, the whispers were gone, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest. Maria packed her camp and decided to hike around the lake again, trying to find where the whispers had come from. She found nothing unusual, but that night, as darkness fell, the whispers returned. They were louder now, clearer, layered with more voices. They seemed to press in on her, filling the air around her tent. And sometimes she heard other sounds mixed within the whispers. A soft, rhythmic splash, like something large moving slowly, just below the surface of the lake. A distant, almost human sigh, filled with a deep loneliness. Maria stopped sleeping soundly. She would lie awake listening to the whispering lake, her heart pounding. She felt a strange pull towards the water, a powerful urge to go to its edge, to listen more closely, to understand what the voices were saying. It felt like they were calling to her, inviting her. One particularly dark night, the sky was completely covered by thick clouds, hiding the moon and stars. The rain began to fall softly, a steady drumming on her tent. But even through the rain, the whispers intensified. They were no longer soft and musical. They were sharp, insistent, filling her head, drowning out the sound of the falling rain. They had taken on a new tone, more urgent, more demanding. It felt like a direct command. She couldn't resist. She stumbled out of her tent, drawn by an unseen force, walking towards the shimmering black surface of the lake. As she reached the shore, the whispers became deafening, a symphony of countless voices crying out all at once. It filled her head, drowning out her thoughts, drowning out the sound of the rain and the crickets. The lake was glowing, not with light from above, but with a faint, deep internal glow, a soft emerald green that pulsed with the sound of the whispers. It was terrifyingly beautiful, and within that glow, she saw movement, not distinct shapes, but immense, undulating masses, shifting just below the surface, like colossal shadows, darker than the lake, yet strangely luminescent within the green light. They were vast, shapeless forms, twisting and turning slowly, rising from the profound depths. They seemed to be reaching, stretching upwards, slowly, languidly, towards the shore, towards her. The whispers were no longer just voices. They were a single, unified cry, so powerful it made her whole body vibrate, resonating with something deep within her. It was a profound, ancient sadness mixed with an overwhelming yearning. Then she heard words, not spoken words, but thoughts, clear as a bell, transmitted directly into her mind by the overwhelming sound. They were simple, ancient, and filled with an aching loneliness. Come to me. Join us. We are alone. Maria stumbled backward, terrified, her legs heavy and stiff. She tried to run, but her legs felt like they were rooted to the damp earth. The whispers pulled at her, a physical force, a gentle, invisible hand, drawing her closer to the glowing, shifting surface of the water. She could feel the cold spray of the lake against her skin, the dampness seeping through her clothes, the scent of damp earth and something strangely sweet, like old wet leaves, filled her nostrils. Then she realized. The pull, it wasn't just coming from the lake. It was coming from her. A deep, undeniable yearning was rising within her, an overwhelming desire to step into the glowing green depths, to join the vast, unseen things that called to her. Her own feet were beginning to move, inch by agonizing inch, towards the water, towards the shifting forms in the depths. With a desperate, animalistic cry, she broke free, tearing herself away from the lake. She scrambled backward, stumbling over roots and rocks, away from the hum that still vibrated through her, a phantom limb. She ran back to her tent, tore it down in a frenzy, threw her gear into her backpack, and fled the campsite. She ran through the dark forest, not caring about the trail, crashing through bushes, stumbling, getting up and running again, until she burst out of the trees onto a paved road. She didn't stop running until she reached the nearest small town. Maria never went back to that forest. She avoids lakes now, especially those in deep, quiet places. She tries to forget the whispers, the glow, the things she saw. But sometimes, when the rain falls and the night is completely silent, she hears it. A low, soft humming, a wordless, sorrowful melody rising from somewhere deep within her own throat. And she knows with a bone-chilling certainty that it's not just the lake that wants her anymore. Part of her wants to answer its call, and one night she fears she will finally wade into the glowing green depths to become one of the vast, unseen things that hum their eternal song beneath the quiet surface, forever trapped in its lonely chorus.
Story 4. The Unseen Campmate.
Liam loved camping alone. He loved the solitude, the feeling of being truly self-reliant in the vast wilderness. This trip, he chose a spot deep in an old, quiet forest, far from any marked trails. He spent the first day setting up his perfect camp, a small tent, a neat fire pit, his gear laid out just so. The forest was calm, silent, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. He cooked his dinner over the fire, feeling completely at peace. As dusk settled, he zipped up his tent, crawled inside, and fell asleep quickly, tired from the long day. But that night, he woke up suddenly. The rain had started a soft, rhythmic patter on his tent. He heard a faint rattle coming from outside. It sounded like his cooking pot, which he had left upside down on a rock near the fire. He frowned. The wind wasn't strong enough to move it. He thought maybe a small animal, a raccoon, was exploring. He waited, listening. The rattling stopped. Then he heard a soft clink, like a metal cup being gently set down, followed by a faint, wet lapping sound, as if something was drinking water from his cup. Liam's heart began to beat faster. He had left his water bottle and metal cup on a log outside. He knew animals could be clumsy, but this sounded deliberate.
He told himself it was just a curious fox or a clever raccoon.
He tried to go back to sleep, but the sounds made him uneasy.
He lay awake for a long time,
Listening to the rain and the occasional faint rustle from just outside his tent, as if something was moving silently around his camp. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Liam crawled out of his tent. He looked at his campsite. His cooking pot was overturned as he left it, but his metal cup was standing upright on the log, and it was empty. He had filled it almost to the top with water the night before. And beside it, on the damp wood of the log, there was a faint, muddy imprint.
it looked like a tiny, three-toed footprint.
Liam felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary animal.
He packed up his camp quickly.
His hand shaking slightly, he decided to move to a different spot, deeper in the forest, hoping to leave whatever it was behind. He hiked for hours, feeling increasingly alone, increasingly watched. That evening, he set up his tent in a new clearing, far from his last campsite. He put all his food and water inside his tent, just to be safe. As darkness fell, the rain started again. A soft, steady drumming. He zipped himself into his tent,
Feeling a little safer.
but then he heard it. A faint scratching sound. It wasn't coming from outside his tent. It was coming from inside his tent, from the far corner, near his backpack.
Liam froze, his breath held tight. He shone his flashlight towards the sound. Nothing. Just the nylon walls of his tent, his neatly packed backpack. The scratching stopped. Then he felt it. A cold, soft brush against his ankle, inside his sleeping bag. Like something thin and damp was slowly sliding against his skin. He gasped, pulling his leg away quickly. He scrambled to the other side of the tent, pressing himself against the far wall. The scratching started again, coming from where his ankle had been. Then a faint giggle. A small, hollow, childlike sound, seeming to come from the very air inside his tent. Liam screamed, a raw, terrified sound. He fumbled with the tent zipper, ripping it open, and burst out into the pouring rain, not caring about his gear, just desperate to escape. He ran blindly through the dark forest, crashing through bushes, slipping on wet leaves, not knowing where he was going. He could still hear the faint, hollow giggle following him, seeming to float on the wind. He ran until he was completely exhausted, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He finally collapsed against a large tree, gasping for breath, shivering in the cold rain. He was deep in the forest, lost and alone. He spent the rest of the night huddled against the tree, too terrified to move, listening to the rain and the occasional faint giggle that seemed to come from the shadows around him. He could feel its presence. He knew it was still there, unseen, somewhere nearby. When the sun finally rose,
Casting long, pale light through the trees, the giggle was gone. The air felt clear. Liam, exhausted and numb, slowly made his way out of the forest, finding a distant road after hours of walking. Liam never went camping alone again. He never goes into deep forests. He lives in a small apartment now, surrounded by people and noise, never truly finding quiet. But sometimes, when the rain falls and the house is silent, he feels it. A cold, soft brush against his ankle in the darkness. And sometimes he hears it. A faint, hollow giggle coming from the empty corner of his room. And he knows, with a bone-chilling certainty, that the unseen campmate isn't just in the forest. It followed him home. It's always nearby, and it's always ready to play. Story 5. The Clockwork Man. Michael was a photographer who loved old, forgotten places. He found beauty in rust and decay. His latest adventure took him to a huge, abandoned factory on the edge of town. It was a massive, silent building, its windows broken like empty eyes, its brick walls crumbling. People said it had been closed for 50 years, and no one ever went inside. He arrived early one morning, before the sun was fully up. Hoping to catch the eerie light, he slipped through a gap in the fence and pushed open a heavy, creaking door. The inside was vast and cold, filled with dark shadows and strange, rusting machines that looked like giant, sleeping beasts. The air smelled of old metal, dust, and as he walked deeper into the factory, his footsteps echoing loudly, he heard a sound. A faint, rhythmic clunk, whir, clunk, whir. It sounded like an old machine slowly working. He frowned. The power had been off for decades. He told himself it was just the wind blowing through the broken windows, moving a loose part. He followed the sound, his camera ready. He moved through huge, silent rooms, past rusting gears and broken conveyor belts. The clunking and whirring grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like something was actually working deep inside the factory. Then he saw him. In a large, open space, lit by a single, dirty skylight that cast a dim, gray beam, stood an old man. He was very old, with thin white hair and a dark, stained work coat. He stood perfectly still, his back to Michael, facing a huge, strange machine covered in levers and dials. The old man wasn't moving, but the machine was, and from it came the clunk, whir that had drawn Michael in. The machine looked like it was building something, or taking something apart, in a slow, endless loop. Michael felt a chill. He hadn't expected anyone to be here, let alone an old man working a silent, ancient machine. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He just watched. The old man stood there for what felt like hours, not moving, not turning, just facing the machine. The clunk, whir was constant. Michael decided to leave. This was too strange. He backed away slowly, his footsteps silent on the dusty floor. He didn't want the old man to know he was there. But as he reached the doorway to the next room, he heard a faint creak, like old bones bending. He looked back. The old man was still facing the machine, but his head had turned, slowly. His face was now looking directly at Michael. His eyes were wide open, a pale, lifeless blue. They didn't blink. And on his face, a faint, unsettling smile slowly appeared. It was a cold, empty smile, like a doll's. Michael gasped, spinning around and running. He ran through the factory, the clunk, whir, now sounding like it was directly behind him, closer with every step. He could hear a faint, soft shuffle, like old, tired feet dragging quickly on the concrete floor. He didn't look back. He burst out of the factory and didn't stop running until he was back at his car, his chest burning, his hands shaking. He drove away quickly, leaving the silent, dark factory behind. He tried to forget the old man, the machine, the cold smile. He stopped taking photos of abandoned places, but the image of the old man's face, his pale, unblinking eyes, stayed with him. A few weeks later, Michael was at home, trying to relax. It was late, and the rain had begun to fall outside, tapping gently on his window. He was almost asleep when he heard a faint sound from his living room. Clunk, whir, clunk, whir. He sat upright in bed, his heart hammering. It was the sound from the factory. He thought he was imagining it. He got out of bed, crept to his living room door, and slowly pushed it open. The living room was dark, but in the center, where his coffee table usually sat, was a small, crudely built machine made of old wood and rusted metal bits. It was working, slowly, silently. Clunk, whir, clunk, whir. And beside it, facing the machine, stood the old man, the same old man from the factory. He was standing perfectly still, his back to Michael. Michael felt a profound, chilling terror. How did he get into his house? How did that machine get there? He tried to scream, but his voice was gone. Then the machine stopped. The clunk, whir died out. A deep, heavy silence filled the room. Slowly, the old man began to turn. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like an old toy winding down.
He faced Michael.
His pale blue eyes were wide, unblinking, and his unsettling smile was wider now, fixed on his face.
He slowly raised a hand.
His fingers were long and thin, stained dark with oil and rust. He pointed at Michael. And then he spoke, mechanical, like a broken record, the words grinding out with a faint clunk, whir, sound underneath. You are the next part. Michael stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the old man, on the machine. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The old man began to take a step towards him, his movements stiff, like a robot. Clunk, whir, shuffle. Michael burst into a panicked sprint, running from his house, leaving the door wide open. He didn't stop until he was miles away, finding shelter with a distant relative who lived in a busy, noisy part of the city. He never went back to his home. He lives in constant fear now. He avoids quiet places. He avoids old buildings. He always checks his windows, his doors. But sometimes, when the rain falls and he's alone at night, he hears it. A faint clunk, whir, clunk, whir, coming from somewhere nearby. And sometimes he feels it, a cold, heavy gaze, watching him from the shadows. And he knows, with a bone-chilling certainty, that the old man isn't just an old man. He's a machine. And the factory wasn't abandoned. It was just waiting for new parts. And now it has found its next one. And it's always moving, always building, always looking for its next part. And one day, Michael fears, the old man will find him again, and he will become a new, silent, clunking, whirring part of the machine.